Good morning. Today is March the 11th. It's the first night of Ramadan today.
Oh, snaps.
So I don't know if that means anything to you.
It means it's the first night of Ramadan.
But my calendar says that this date is approximate because it's based on a lunar calendar. Anywho, today is March the 11th, a day after daylight savings time. So I hope everyone woke up on time. Everyone was on church.
On church.
On church at time.
Yep.
So that was great.
Yep.
As we are recording this on Sunday afternoon, this is a very limited type of experience because we rarely record Sunday afternoon. So, but today is Monday, March the 11th. We got a lot to talk about today, and I have to give a quick update on my life. All this and more after the intro. Hit it, Brian. Brian the guy. Welcome to the Dear Church podcast, where we exist to fill your ears and your minds with the study of God to see the world as disciples of Christ. My name is Sam Yang.
I am John Saxio.
He's not here, actually. He's on mission, as they say. He is away doing who knows what, honestly. Dude's up to no good all the time. He's not with us because he's in a meeting, actually. And we have with us Pastor Eugene. And today is Monday the 11th. Pastor Eugene, I just want to say that right now, a very popular thing to do is watch this movie called Dune, and we watched it. How did you like the film?
It was a pretty epic film. I would recommend it, especially if you're going to watch it in IMAX.
Yeah. It was like, I thought I was in Dune. That's what it felt like, because I thought I was going to fall into the screen. So, great film.
Didn't everything feel quiet to you after you came out of the movie theater?
I think I have bad ears, so everything was just hunky-dory over here.
I see.
But today, Pastor Eugene, we have a lot on our plate. And that, we've been going through the book of Genesis, or at least the first couple chapters of it. We just hit chapter 3 yesterday. But 2 weeks ago, you talked about marriage and this covenant that we have in marriage. And I thought, you know what? How about we talk about marriage a little bit, maybe dive a little bit deeper into it, if you don't mind. And I know that we already have an episode on dating and on marriage, but I thought a fresh one with the boys, as they say, right? They say that would be helpful. That's what we're doing today. We have a lot of singles listen to this. And so first, for our single men and ladies, you talked about God's will, right? You talked about the preceptive, the decretive. Is it decretive or decorative? But, you talked about God's will, the decretive, the preceptive, and the hidden will. And obviously, knowing who we're going to marry is God's hidden will. It's not written in the scriptures. It's not God's law. And God sure did decree it in the sense of he has selected for us who we are to marry, right? Because everything is predestined. But my question is, Pastor Eugene, how do I know? How do I know that this dude is the dude that I'm supposed to marry? How do I know this?
Well, first of all, if it's a dude, then we know by the preceptive will of God that you should not marry him.
Who are you talking about?
I'm talking about you.
No, I think that there is this. No, whenever I'm in character right now.
You're in character as a woman?
I'm a young single female.
What's your name?
I'm not going that deep in character. It's just, okay. If, for us singles, how do I know that this girl is the girl that I'm supposed to marry? How do I know that this dude is the dude I'm supposed to marry? Because the Bible just tells us we're supposed to marry a Christian, right? We're not to be unevenly yoked. So that seems to be the only prerequisite, if you will. So how do I know this dude's the dude? How do I know this girl is the girl? How do I know? Can I know for sure?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting way of putting things. How do you know if this person is the one that you're supposed to marry?
Yeah.
And what does that mean, right? Does that mean that there is only one person out there for you? Where did you get that idea? I mean, if you're married to someone, yes, that is the one. So once you're married, that person is the one for you. There is no one else.
Yeah.
But when you are looking for a spouse, is there one for you in the sense where there's only one person you could ever marry? Anybody else is going to be like this horrible thing, or it's just not going to be as good. And I think that's a very interesting kind of concept that we've come across. And perhaps it would not be very helpful to start there in the sense where we don't want to simply look at it fatalistically, saying, oh, if I don't know, if I marry the wrong person, I'm doomed, in that fatalistic sense. We want to marry the best we can, obviously. But, I think many people might be asking, well, what should I look for then in a partner?
Right. Okay.
Like, how do I know this person is the one, meaning what kind of characteristics should I look for?
Handsome.
Right. Well, that's interesting though. Even psychologists have come to know the understanding that women might initially like guys that are handsome, but they would rather marry someone who is ambitious than handsome.
I thought you were going to say cute.
No,
because there's a difference.
Yeah, it's low on that tier when you marry someone. Even in a free society like, where we're living, women don't simply marry a handsome man.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or a cute guy.
Yeah.
They marry someone who has potential or a future, or someone who's accomplished, someone who has dreams. And so it's almost pragmatic. Like as if even liberal leftist women, if they were to marry, they don't simply look for handsomeness or some kind of outward appearance. They look for inner qualities of character. Whereas men, on the other hand, they are different. They do look for beauty, but also beauty is something like warmth, caregiver. That's quite interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so they will look for these outward qualities in the beginning, but those outward qualities they associate with things like warmth or caregiving.
My wife married me straight on looks, I think.
Is that what she told you? Because I never saw her as a liar.
No, she would never tell me that, but I could just tell. It's because I'm a looker.
What do you look at?
But, okay, I want to just kind of go back a couple steps, because you said, is there the one for you? But if we know that God has predestined everything and he's sovereign and he controls everything, then wouldn't we think that there is someone that is predestined for us, like the one? Because if we say that that's not the case, it almost seems like God's not sovereign. It almost seems like there are multiple people we could choose from, and you have your pick of the litter.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I think some people do believe that, but I personally don't think so. I think there is someone that you marry, that you covenant with, that you now have to, not simply keep the bond, but you are to have it flourish, have it, bear fruit and produce. This is the person that you will commit yourself to, that you will cleave to, like it says in Genesis chapter 2. And so there are things of that nature. But if you're thinking that God has this one person out of, 3 billion or 4 billion people, that seems a little, for me, it seems a little egotistical, a little self-centered. Like, what? I mean, like, what? And so, does it mean that you can marry anybody, though? And obviously not. And so God does narrow it down to a general degree in the Bible. If we keep it to the general degree, then I think it really comes down to personal preference for us in a free society. Yeah. Mind you, there are people in the past and even some societies today where they still arrange marriages. And statistically speaking, arranged marriages have a lower rate of divorce.
Yeah.
Even when they come to free societies than people who marry out of, quote unquote love.
Because people often say that they fall out of love, whereas those who have arranged marriages, they understand that it's not just because you lovey-dovey this person, but it's a responsibility. It's a commitment.
Yeah. It really is more about the commitment. And I think one of the dangers of thinking in the way that you've posed the question is that you're really thinking about yourself when you ask the question. So who is the right person for me? Rarely do people ask the question, who am I the right person for? And so when you do get married, when is that going to flip? Because when you get married, it has to flip. The question has to be flipped to the point where you're like, I need to be the right person for this person, right? So I want to be the best husband I can be for my wife should be the question now, or should be the struggle that I have now as a husband rather than, is this wife good for me, right? Because if you continue to ask the question, is this person right for me, then the whole marriage is self-centered. Mm-hmm. So when you ask the question, the danger, I think it's a huge danger, is that, when are you ever going to be sure if this is the right person for you? Right when you say I do, are you going to flip a switch then? Is that what you truly believe? Or I think from the better way to think about it is from the beginning, you prepare yourself to be a good husband. Mm. And then when there is an opportunity to marry a good woman, what you want to do is be a good man to this woman that you will cleave with. And so I think that is the better question, perhaps, that we should be posing to ourselves rather than, is this woman right for me?
So you use this word cleave, and I know that we read that in the end of Genesis 2, right? Cleaving between man and woman. What does that mean? Because in science, I thought cleaving was like when a cell becomes like 4 or whatever. I was pre-med, but there's a reason why I didn't go med. I was just pre. So cleaving, what does that mean?
Well, I mean, in the Bible, in our ESV Bibles, so cleaving, I think, is a KJV way of interpreting it or translating it. In the ESV, it's translated as hold fast.
Ah, okay.
So I think that's probably a good way to do it as well. It's to keep close. It's to cling, It's to make sure that you would, make sure this person is not separated from you.
So, I mean, that verse is Genesis 2:24. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast or cleave to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. So it's not just talking about the physical intimacy, but it's talking about just the oneness of a couple in marriage. Is that what it is?
Yeah, it means to, and there's another, there's many instances this verb is used. Let's just go to one. It's 2 Kings chapter 3, verse 3.
2 Kings chapter 3, verse 3 reads, Nevertheless, he clung to the sin of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, which he made Israel to sin. He did not depart from it.
Yeah, so the word clung, and that's what it is. That's why it's cleave, clung. It's to hold fast. It's to really hold tightly and close to you. And how close are you supposed to hold your wife? And it says it in the rest of verse 24. It's to become one.
Yeah.
It's to become one flesh.
Yeah.
And they shall become one flesh. That's how close you are to hold her to you. And so this is a fantastic imagery that we're given in the Bible where there are two separate people, but they will become one. And so you're still two distinct people, but you are one in marriage, and you move as one, you act as one, you become one family unit. And in that oneness, you show love, you produce fruit, and one of the ultimate forms of that fruit, they're children.
Little babies.
Yeah. And so there are a lot of great things that we see from the cleaving that we have read in the Bible.
So, what does that mean practically, though? I mean, because we know that when the marriage is consummated, that's a physical oneness. But practically, day to day, what does that mean to cleave or to hold fast? Does that mean, we do everything together, we make decisions together? Like, what does it mean to be one, though?
Right. And so if it's not physically, literally joined, what does that mean? And I think Jesus kind of elaborates on it too. Mark chapter 10, verse 8 and 9 helps us to see the picture.
Mark chapter 10, verse 8 and 9 reads, "And the two shall become one flesh, so they are no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let not man separate."
And so that's the beginning. What Jesus is pointing out is this joining is not your decision or it's something of your doing, rather. It is something that God does. So when you are married, God joins these two together. And so we should not separate these two. So he's doing this in reference to divorce, obviously, but he's teaching us what marriage is. Again, when Paul talks about marriage in Ephesians chapter 5, he talks about the husbands loving their wives as they love their own body.
Yep.
So you would treat your wife as you would treat your own body. And you obviously wouldn't put poison in your body. You give your body the best things that you could possibly give your body. And so you would treat your wife as you would treat your own body. You want to give your wife the best things as you give yourself the best things.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, you see in this one flesh unity that God has sealed a perfect love. The love that you're supposed to display is there. You want the best for this person. You want to lift this person up. You want to make sure that whatever you do for the good of the person. You want to make sure that, and read the verse after that in verse 25 in Genesis chapter 2.
Genesis chapter 2, verse 25 reads, "And the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed."
So there is a perfect peace between them. They were not ashamed. There's innocence, there's peace, but there's no sense of, let's say, the sin that we see now, where we see all these other, a variety of manifestations of sin and, that kind of destructive behavior that we see in marriages today.
Yeah.
A true marriage that God has intended for man and wife is for that kind of perfect peace or ease or comfort to be between them, so much so that even when they are naked, they are not ashamed. And so that was the original plan that God had for man and wife. So to cleave, again, to go back to your original question, to cleave then would be to cling on to the person so much so that you would be in that kind of perfect unity with them.
Okay. The only reason why I bring this up again is because I think sometimes when we talk about the word cling, it's not a good thing. Like, you don't want to be clingy. Like, you don't want to be the clingy guy. Clingy guys are awful. So if you're a clingy guy, cut it out. But the cling that you're talking about is a holding fast. Not only physically, but also just in every way possible.
No, I think, yeah, you're right. Clingy might have a negative connotation now because clinging means you're overbearing.
Yeah.
And overbearing is never a good thing. That means there's no trust. So cleave, there's trust in that because there's perfect ease, like I said before. So with trust, there isn't that extreme of an overbearing attitude toward the other person. Like, you always have to have air tags on her because you don't even know where she is. Ooh. It's not only about like, I don't trust her with fidelity. Who knows what might happen to her? I'm just worried or something like that. And that could also be overbearing and quote unquote clingy. But when we're talking about clinging, we're talking about holding fast to the woman, to protect her, to guard her, to keep her, to do all the things that you have been called to do, to lead her well. And if you're a man, and if you're a woman, it says that in Ephesians chapter 5, I think we've gone over some of these passages in the past, but 1 Peter chapter 3 about women being subject to her husband. At the end of chapter 5 in Ephesians, Paul says, see that the woman respects her husband. Yeah. So if you're a woman and you're thinking about what cleaving or clinging or holding fast to means, it's also about respecting. Mm-hmm. So to respect your husband is one of those ways that can happen. And so I think that alone is very challenging. because we live in a broken society. We live in a fallen world. We live in a state of sin. And, the challenge would be, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. Can you do that?
Mm-hmm.
Can you love your wife through the highs and lows, especially the lows, just as Christ loved you through your lows?
Yeah.
Just like you love yourself. And I think that's a very hard ask, and a lot of people fail. At the same time, for wives, can you respect your husbands? Can you submit to your husbands when they're not perfect? When they're, when they don't look like Jesus at times, that kind of thing. And can you respect them? Can you give them honor? Can you, live out the call that you have to play the role of the church in that Christ bride or Christ church relationship that we see that marriage points to?
Thank you. And there's actually a lot of questions that I want to ask following up with that. But first and foremost, where did you get your haircut? I just realized you got a haircut. It's very nice.
Thank you. It's a Korean place.
Oh.
Yeah.
And they give you a fade. Wow.
They give you a shampoo before and after, so I like that.
Wow.
Yeah.
I would like that.
Hey, these Korean places, they give you like shampoos.
But Korean places aren't really good with the fade, but they gave you a nice fade. Wow.
I don't know. People have been advancing and improving.
Our people have been advancing.
I didn't say our. You heard it as our.
Oh, no, I didn't hear anything.
I just said people.
Yeah, I don't know anything that you just said. So I guess continuing on with what you were saying. So cleaving, we know, is in marriage. But oftentimes, and I see this a lot, there are signs of quote unquote cleaving in dating. Dating has become almost a being married before married type of situation in America, at least in the Western society that we live in today. Is that dangerous? What are some signs that we could look at, and how do we get away from this?
Yeah, I think we can go to either one of the two extremes. Especially if you've grown up in the church, or maybe not even growing up in the church. People say dating is like a courtship, that you'll see what this person will look like when they're married.
Yeah, people always say courtship. Yeah.
You look in the past. Do you think people dated in the past? I don't think they did. You think Joseph and Mary dated?
Betrothed.
They were betrothed to each other. They treated each other like they were married, in the sense where they would keep each other from looking at other people, for sure.
They're exclusive.
But they were still exclusive in that sense. But I don't think they went on like coffee dates or anything like that. Perhaps, but it wasn't something that you would have seen as a normative action in the past. But today it's like, well, I want to see what it's like to have coffee with this person. And then you can see, as that progresses, if this logic progresses, then why is it terrible that you live together? I'm not gonna sleep with them. I just want to see how they live together, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Or how they brush their teeth, or what kind of morning routine they have. Because I need to make sure. I need to make sure I'm compatible with them.
Yeah. Sensodyne user.
Right. So I think, well, that's a prerequisite. If you use like Colgate,
oh
it's
gosh,
a deal breaker.
Colgate is just a school. Ugh, it should never be a toothpaste.
Anyway, so this is my opinion, of course, but this is what I see. I see that a lot of people will now use it to measure people's quality in marriage. So if I see this, then my marriage will be of this. Almost as if this will help me see if I will have a successful marriage by looking at the person. Again, I think it goes back to what I said initially. Your primary focus is on the other person. Is this person compatible with me? Where your primary focus should have been, am I compatible, or am I making myself compatible as a future husband or a future wife? Now, that's not to say that there aren't any deal breakers when you look at the other side. I'm not saying that.
Yeah.
But if the first question is, are there any deal breakers from the other side, or red flags from the other side? Perhaps what you are missing is that big portion of getting yourself ready for marriage. And perhaps that's why you're having trouble finding a quote unquote partner or spouse, because they have to fit this criteria. sometimes it's like a 50-page list. Well, I don't know, whatever it is. When, you know, I think the main part is you should be thinking about how you can be faithful as a wife or husband. Now, if you're asking me then, well, what should be the minimal criteria? I think you said it. Is this person a faithful Christian? And is this person someone that can be equally yoked with me? And we could take it in a variety of ways. Like, for instance, if you are a, you know, let's say you consider yourself a mature Christian and this person just turned to the faith, that will pose problems for you.
So, there's so many questions. How do I cycle through them? No, it's because, you know, we know that we are to be equally yoked and that we are not to marry non-believers. But I think oftentimes, if the girl is pretty enough, if the guy makes enough money, if the guy has a good personality, we justify saying, oh, no, he's a baby Christian.
No,
He's
first
a young
of all,
Christian.
yeah, but we should put this caveat. Well, if you're married and you're asking these questions, it's too late. Like,
yeah.
So I hope people get that. If you're married, you need to be committed to this person.
Oh,
because,
yeah, absolutely.
Again, this is not simply you making the commitment, which should stand strong on its own. But again, like Jesus Christ said, it's what God joins together. So God has joined you together, and let not man separate that then. And so if you are married, you have made the commitment, but it is God who joined you together. So you make that work. But if you are looking to get married and you want to, you know, be prudent and shrewd in making sure that you marry, quote unquote, the right person, which again, I would push back on, but marry well would probably be better. Then there is that understanding that you should be at similar levels. Obviously, you know, you're not going to be exact. No one's exactly the same, you know? I don't think you married your wife thinking she's at the exact same, like, Christian maturity level. We are on the exact same journey. For a lot of people, it's not the case.
No, she's pretty close though.
Yeah, but I would say it is something where people would look to on the extremes, meaning they would think about someone who just became a Christian. It's like, that's okay because they're a Christian. It's like, well, there'll be problems.
Right.
Yeah.
That's my question. How Christian is Christian though? Because that's my thing. It's people are going to say, if they like this person, they don't view this biblical criteria to be of the utmost importance. They think of it as a box they have to check. And so if they went to church once a month, they're a Christian. Like we tend to just kind of use this as a rubric that we have to check off instead of really trying to see this man's or woman's Christian character. So how Christian is Christian though?
Yeah. So I want to tread pretty carefully here because it really depends on culture too.
Yeah.
Meaning the circumstances that you're surrounded with. Is it better to get married to a, you know, quote unquote newbie Christian or not get married at all? Which one's better?
Okay.
You know, so people ask that question. I think that's a good question. So, because for instance, in Japan, the churches are filled with women. Even though the church is small, the churches that are in existence, they're filled with women. They have a really hard time finding a man because men don't believe, or men are less likely to be Christian there. So if you're a Christian woman in Japan, it's pretty tough. And so when they find a man that just comes in, they just came once and they're like, you know, the ladies can kind of perk up because they really want to marry. And here's this man who's a Christian. So it's difficult in many places. I think we are in a place where we are kind of rich in that sense. There are a lot of people that go to church, and there's a whole spectrum of men and women, you know, in that faith. So if you want to go down to the bare bones, then it is a Christian. This person just has to be a Christian. That's what it should mean to be equally yoked, okay? But if you want to go further than that is what I'm saying. If you want to do the wisest thing possible, you want to do the best thing that you could possibly do, and let's say you do have a choice, then wouldn't you want to marry someone who is most assuredly, as best as you can know, a Christian? So someone that goes to church once a month, I'm not sure that you can qualify that person as a Christian. I mean, what's the excuse of them not going? Because one of the key criteria of being a Christian is following Hebrews chapter 10, not giving up meeting together as some of you are in the habit of doing. So being obedient to that command and then coming to church so that you would stir up one another to love and good works. Is that what this person is doing? Or at least is this person striving to be that? And if they're not, then how can you affirm this person's confession of faith?
Speaking of confession of faith, do they have to be reformed? And the reason why I ask you this is because, you know, we believe that the Reformed faith is the biblical faith. And we, of course, prioritize what the Bible teaches. If this man or woman is not reformed and they believe in the shalalas, are we to marry this person? Because then by that, we're thinking that this person may not believe what the Bible teaches.
Yeah, I think so we can get into the minutia of everything. I just don't want us, again, to lose the principle. The principle is this person needs to be a genuine Christian, as far as you can tell, to the best of your ability. Because, no one really knows the heart except God. Mm-hmm. But we can see evidence of whether this person is a Christian or not, basically by seeing their life. And is the person genuinely given over to the Lord? Because if we went to the criteria of simply reformed, then you could still argue, well, Sam, you weren't reformed for your whole life. There was a time when you believed in the shalalas.
It's a very short period.
But there was a time. What if that person saw you then and said, nah, this person's a shalala guy?
That's true.
And they judged you on that particular season in life. So, the way I see it is this person, the first and foremost question that we are posed with when we look at a partner is this person a genuine disciple of Christ?
Yeah.
So that's the case. That's the thing that we should be asking. And if you're saying reformed, I think what we are really asking, then the core and the essence of that question is probably, does this person believe what God says in His Word? Because even if they believe shalala or not, that's really the question. Do you really believe what God says? Because we're not really expecting someone at the end of their sanctification journey.
Yeah.
When we marry someone, they're somewhere from the beginning to the middle. And so when we say, well, there's this minimum, well, I want to know why you came up with that minimum. Who gave you that criteria? Because once you start putting criteria down, aren't you perhaps even superficially adding things that don't need to be added? They need to be perfect in their theology. Well, what about if they understand shalala to be good, but they are open, as long as the Bible says so, they're open to their hearts and minds being changed? Isn't that a better position than someone who claims to be reformed, but they hold this, backwards view on women, let's say? Yeah. They claim to be reformed, but women should only be barefoot in the kitchen or something to that effect, right?
That's some cold feet.
Yeah, but the point is, there are some people who call themselves, let's say, reformed and would still think that.
Right.
Wouldn't they also be incompatible then?
Yeah.
And so those are things where you would say, well, and that person refuses his mind to be changed or her mind to be changed. Isn't that kind of worse then? So when you look at people, what are some of the qualities that you are looking for? You would want to probably look for Christ-like qualities. Right. You want to look for people who are genuine disciples of Jesus Christ and who are seeking after Him, following after Him, taking the cross and denying themselves, just as Christ says, because that's what makes a disciple. Right. Take up your cross, deny yourself, follow me. And so that's what makes a disciple. And that's who we ought to consider a Christian. And even that is a high call, to be honest, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's tough. Being a disciple is tough. But we know that is the criteria that we are to look at in our future spouse, a Christian disciple, a Christian man, a Christian woman. But, like you said, there are some preference things, I think, that come into play. What if they're a very good Christian disciple, but we fight all the time? There's conflict. Is there a specific way that Christians are to resolve conflict? How are we supposed to view conflict? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Because we're never going to agree on everything. So is that a deal breaker? How do we kind of think through stuff like that? And the reason why I ask this is because I think most of our listeners or our church members would be looking for Christian men and women. But I think when it gets down to the nitty gritty, that's where it gets a little difficult.
Yeah. So today's sermon, I mentioned Gottman's survey.
Gottman?
Yeah, John Gottman. And I think, I mean, you weren't able to hear it, right?
No, I was in children's ministry.
But there are what Gottman. So Gottman he was, I believe, a psychologist and did a study in the University of Washington in Seattle in 1986. It was called the Love Lab. And he did a bunch of stuff. And he would, go in and measure people's heart rates as they were together.
Oh, wow.
And while they're looking at boats passing by, as they're talking to each other. And he would look at their pupils and all that stuff. And so there's one thing that I mentioned about the Love Lab and what he got out from it. He measured what, and I'm going a little further now, what would make you a master of marriage and what would make you a disaster in marriage. And one of the disasters is what he called the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And what I explained in the sermon was the 4 things were stonewalling, defensiveness, criticism, and contempt. Basically what it is when you continue to fight, what he has found, it's one of those 4. Mm-hmm. You're either stonewalling, you're either defensive, or you're either a criticizer, or you hold contempt. And there's men are more inclined to do one, and women are more inclined to do one, but both are inclined to do the last one, which is contempt. And when you have contempt for one another, this is what Gottman says, that it is probably the biggest precursor to divorce. And so when people fight, the question is, how do you fight? And do you fight with this understanding that you are to cleave to one another, meaning you are to hold fast? Or when you fight, do you push away and you continue to separate and divide? Because that's what we saw Adam and Eve do. Adam would actually divide himself away from Eve, even when he would say, it's the woman that you made for me that gave me the fruit and I ate it. So he continues to separate himself. And that's what blaming does. Blaming separates you from the people that you're supposed to hold fast, especially in that covenant bond of marriage. When you blame your wife, what you are actually doing is you're separating. And then when you blame your wife or your husband, you're holding them in this contempt or this disgust, right? I can't even look at you, that kind of thing, where now you're no longer loving the person or respecting the person. You're actually doing the very opposite of what you're supposed to do. So when you ask the question, how should you fight? I would start with, don't fight like that.
Yeah.
Don't fight by stonewalling. Don't fight by being defensive. Don't fight by criticizing, and don't fight especially in contempt for one another. That is truly toxic in your marriages. And so I do recommend that book by Brad Wilcox. It's called Get Married. And it just came out in February, so just a few weeks ago. And one of the things that he just does, he just points out statistics, and he says, we see this quality and this behavior in certain climates of either macro or microclimates of marriage, and this is going to be helpful to them, or this is a strong force that destabilizes marriage. And so he continues to go on. And what's interesting that I see is that when he looked at, let's say, who has the strongest marriages, they were Asians. Asians have the strongest and the lowest rates of divorce, especially Indians. And a lot of Indians actually have arranged marriages.
Right, culturally, yeah.
Culturally. And so that's interesting, because he did this study in 1986. So it's an old study. And now the divorce rates, I believe, are either the same or higher. They're definitely not lower. Mm-hmm. When you look at that, though, perhaps the reason why we have everything so confused is really because, it's maybe not even about fighting. It's about the core identity of who you are in that fight. In that fight, do you see like, oh, there's a way out? Or this person may not have been the one, or something like that. In that fight, do you see yourself separating yourself more with this person? Because if that's the case, then that's a bad thing. Now, I want to, if I may, I want to backpedal back to your question about how should people that are dating then fight. I don't know about if there is, there's this formula on how you should fight. I think when you're dating, you should probably focus on how you can communicate better, day by day or date by date. You can learn how to communicate better. And by communicating better, you will be able to set some nice, foundational groundwork when you eventually do get married. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. I think, yeah, it's helpful. Well, not for me. I'm just saying for those that may be dating.
Yeah, I mean, for most people in our church, I probably counseled most, if not all, of the married couples in our church while they were dating, even you and Angela.
Yeah.
And so, there were rough times, there were good times, and that's basically what dating is. And then what you're basically figuring out, even though you didn't notice at the time, what you guys were basically figuring out was how to communicate better with one another. And if you don't see it that way, and you're just thinking, oh, is this person right for me? Because at the time that's the only thing that you could think of. Is this person right for me? Why do I have to do this? Why do I have to put up with this? And I'm going to get married to this, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
When you're thinking about that, that's pretty defeatist. And it's pretty sad, honestly, when you're in that position. But now when you look back, hopefully you can see that, oh, that's when we learn to communicate better. And this is how I understand her now. So I can receive some of the emotions that she brings, or she can think, I can see why he acts in a certain way, and which is not as emotive as I'd like, or whatever the reason is. And you start to understand how you both communicate. And when you start to understand that, you can hold each other more fast or closer rather than push each other away in that communication, even in your fighting.
So I think people may have questions on dating because, you talked about it a little bit earlier. You use the word courtship, and I've heard a lot of people use the word courtship in Christian circles, but not have any idea what that means. They're just going on dates. They're just dating, but they're just calling it courtship as if that makes it any different. They're just relabeling it. So what does it mean to date then? Because the Bible doesn't say anything about dating. And I think so because the Bible doesn't say anything, we tend to see what the world says dating should be or is, and we just follow suit. We have serial daters, and we have people that are scared to date. We don't have an understanding of what dating is or what courtship is or what we need to do to find a mate is pretty much what it is, right? So what do we do? How do we date? What does that look like?
Yeah, so if I may interject a social commentary. So I really want to keep it kind of basic and broad principle wise, but obviously I have my personal thoughts and there's some social commentary that I can put in. I really do think our dating culture has kind of now culminated into the apps that we go through.
Oh yeah.
It's basically what we thought dating was, and then we put it into app form. The apps didn't propagate this. We have already been thinking like this for a long time.
Yeah.
And the apps just kind of accentuate those things. So I haven't done this, but this is what I would imagine. When you create a profile in a dating app, you say, these are your likes and your dislikes. This is what you're looking for. And this is what you're not looking for. These are the things that you find attractive. These are the things that you don't find attractive. And so they try to find someone compatible with that.
Right.
And I think that's why we are led to believe that this is the foremost important thing when it comes to dating. I need to find someone compatible to me. And I think that's false. And so I think people will disagree with me on that one. So perhaps this is a hotter take than I think.
Hot take.
But I don't think it matters. When I was dating Esther, my wife, people ask me, oh, do you guys have like deep theological discussions together? Because no, these are serious questions because they didn't know who she was.
Yeah.
Because they thought I was this, really deep theological, guy. And I can hold conversations with most people. It's like, oh, do you guys talk about like deep theological things? And I would say absolutely not. In fact, almost zero. And they're very confused. They're like, what? How can you marry someone who doesn't have similar interests? And I would ask, what does that mean? What does it mean to have similar interests? Because What I'm thinking about is this person strong in faith? Is this person someone that is going to be a good mother to my children? Is this person that is warm and caring, that will make the household that I live in warm? Those are the things that I'm thinking about. Those are the qualities that I see in the Bible. Is this person worthy to be praised? Meaning, she understands that fearing the Lord is above charm and beauty because those things are deceptive. Or is this a person just, unwittingly and uncaringly given into things like the beauty standards of the world only, not to be oblivious to them, but at the same time, only that. So there are, those extremes that I see in some people where, you could be oblivious to them. That means I would consider that unwise personally. And there are some people that are overly given into them. That's also unwise. And so she knows how to carry herself in public, all those things. And so I think people were confused as to, I always thought that he would marry someone where he can have deep theological discussions with them at the dinner table. And I was thinking, why would I want that? Because I have that right now. Why would I want that in a wife? I could have that anytime. I want something that I can't have. And, it's warmth in conversation. It's intimacy in conversation. It's one of those things that I was personally looking for and praying for and hoping for that I found in my wife by the grace of God. And so when we think simply and solely about compatibility, like we have similar likes, we have similar dislikes, I think we do ourselves a huge disservice because perhaps that's not what God wants for us. Perhaps God wants us to be stretched and he has us marry someone completely different. And so many of us now are actually married to someone that are very similar in personalities. You laugh at the same jokes, you watch the same shows, and things like that. So we're not stretched. And when something goes wrong, we're distraught because our whole lives we were thinking this person is completely compatible with me. Why is this part not working out? Well, I think, that's reality come in because there's nobody that's exactly compatible with you. Nobody. And so if I could come back anecdotally to my wife, she and I watch completely different things. She watches K-drama and I watch Lord of the Rings. And so, and The Office and things like that. And so when we got married, she was very confused at what I was turning on in the TV. And when she would turn on the TV and watch the shows that she liked, I would just laugh. And so she got kind of annoyed that I would laugh at all the K-drama stuff. But honestly, I genuinely thought K-drama was hilarious. Especially in the serious scenes when they keep on crying because their daughter died. It's that's pretty sad. And then for the next 3 episodes, he's thinking about his daughter dying. And so he slumps over in the wall and it's raining. And it's so corny, I just can't help but to laugh. And then she gets mad at me for laughing. Oh, no. But then it's one of those things where you get to learn about the other person, yes, but you get to be stretched yourself. And actually, I have to say, after a few years of marriage, I did start to appreciate a little bit about what Korean drama had to offer. I don't watch it on the regular, but we did watch 1 or 2 together and I was able to appreciate it. And she also watched all of the Lord of the Rings with me, the extended version, and she enjoyed it. She told me which movie she liked, which character she enjoyed.
The extended one
was
tough.
Yeah, the extended one's 3+ hours long.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Anyway, she watched it with me. And so we were able to stretch each other in marriage. We were able to challenge each other. And that's one of the things that we see in Genesis chapter 2, where the woman would be put in the face of Adam. So they would be it's almost as if they were opposed to each other, meaning they would challenge each other and stretch each other. And that's, I think, something that we should expect when we get into a marriage. You should expect to be challenged, to be stretched. This person will sharpen you and make you better through these challenges. Instead of thinking, we're just going to be hunky-dory. I'm just going to like the things that I like even more, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think that is not reality. So my social commentary is exactly that. When we continue to put ourselves in a place or position ourselves in a place where will only reinforce what we think is to be good. We'll never be stretched. We'll never be challenged. And when that challenge comes, we're not ready for the test and we will fail miserably. So I am not a big proponent of saying dating apps are good. I mean, they're good in that people are getting married better, but isn't that because, our society has come to a place where compatibility is like a normative thing to consider at the ultimate priority when you're looking for a spouse, right?
Yeah, but there's no other way to meet people though these days. I mean, we're at work 9 to 5 every single day. By the time we get home from the commute at 7, you eat dinner, you go to sleep. There's no other way though for for people to meet anybody. So, people could say, well, those apps were made because there was a need and they're being used because there was a need. So
yeah, I don't doubt that. But what I'm saying is the criteria that the apps are showing us is the criteria that we had before the apps. The criteria that we had before the apps aren't necessarily a good one either. And so, what did we do before these criterias, came into play where now we have them as a priority? Wasn't it simply, I need to make sure that these person's values are the same as mine?
Yeah.
What I hold to be ultimately good, this person also holds to be ultimately good. Now, that's why in a lot of ancient societies, the people that got married together were people that grew up in the same town, not necessarily from different towns, right?
Yeah.
Maybe they moved there from another town, but you basically saw them from that town. For example, Nazareth and that kind of thing. And so both Joseph and Mary were in Nazareth, right? And so that's where Jesus is from Nazareth. Although Joseph was registered in Bethlehem, so they had to go back.
Yeah.
Therefore, fulfilling the prophecy, though,
right?
Which is crazy. It's crazy how everything fulfills the prophecy that God has. But if you just look at culturally speaking, when you grow up in a similar community, you have similar values. And those are the things that I would probably think are of more importance, not compatibility, but value system. What does this person think about children? I don't care if they like watching The Office. We can laugh at it together. But what's more important? How many children do you want? Because if one person says 4 and the other person says 0, that's going to be a huge, huge wall to climb over to get to the same place once you're married.
Yeah.
If the person's like, I want 0 kids, and the other person's like, wait, I wanted a big family. Oh, that's going to be rough for you guys because that's a value system. That would be more important than if you're compatible, meaning you could watch The Office and giggle together. Honestly. And that's what people don't understand. I remember seeing just this past week, Seth Rogen saying, I don't get it why people want kids. I can sleep with my girlfriend. We get high and we can watch a movie and have sex together. And that's the best life. Because again, the value that they think is the highest are not value systems. The priority that he has is compatibility. But then, that's why perhaps no Hollywood couple lasts.
Yeah.
Because if they are the epitome of what society values, then if society values compatibility as the greatest thing, maybe it's no wonder why no marriages last, because it's values that are important. What do you think about faith? What do you think about, how to raise your children? What are the value systems that you are going to instill within your children? Because that's the value systems that you hold most dear. And that's why the ultimate basic foundational value is this person a Christian? Because that's the worldview that you're coming in from. And if you don't have that worldview, then everything else diverges from there. And so how you raise your kids is completely different. Well, I want my kid to go to church and be a strong Christian. If they're not a Christian, why would they hold that value? That's not important to them. And that's going to be a big problem because your kids, or how you want to raise your kids, stem from the values that you hold dear. And so when you date someone, I would say instead of seeking compatibility, it would be value systems.
I think that's interesting that you bring up compatibility because I think it's true. I think most people, the first question that they ask might be, is this individual a Christian? And then the deal breaker is, are we compatible?
Well, I mean, they just go, is this person aesthetically Christian? You mean like
Yeah.
it doesn't matter like, oh, is this person a strong Christian? All right, let's move on. But if this person is a strong Christian, you should be excited to talk about the values that you hold together, how you want to raise your kids, where you want to live, how close you want to be in the community, how you want to serve the church, because you can say you're a Christian, but then that should be the starter. And so what you should start to talk about then is, how you want to serve the church together. Because one person could be like, well, I don't want to serve the church. Why would I serve the church? What's so good about serving the church? And you're like, huh? I thought you were a Christian. Being a Christian means to serve the church, to serve one another. It says that in Ephesians 5 too. It says submit to one another. And so that's what you would look forward to. And so you start to test out each other's values. And it starts with the Christian part, right?
It's interesting. I think and you brought up the baby Christian before, but whenever the conversation starts with, oh, I'm dating. Oh, who are you dating? Is she Christian? She's a new Christian, but she's open. That's what it is. But she's open. So if you're already justifying her being a new Christian, then I don't know.
Well, I mean, so I have counseled multiple people. One thing I have found is that if you are in love, there is a veil over your eyes.
Not the wedding veil.
Yeah, I don't think I can convince you otherwise. Unless by the mercy of God, your eyes become open.
Yeah.
There is a veil over your eyes and you cannot see. It's very hard to convince someone who's already in love that this person is not right because all they see is compatibility. And even if I told you the whole value thing, they're like, oh man, even if this person is not a Christian, we hold so many similar values. We both want children, and they'll go on.
Yep.
But how to raise those children is going to be different. What kind of essentially foundational, fundamental values that you want to instill is going to be different unless you're not a Christian, And so if you're a Christian, you really want to obey God. And that first thing is to not be unequally yoked. So yeah, that's a tough one. That's why if you are a Christian, you really do want a strong community. And if you're dating the wrong person, I hope at least one person will come up to you and say, brother or sister, I have some concerns.
Yeah.
Yeah. You have to hear that. If that person really does care about you, you'll hear that. And hopefully, at that time, you might not take it well. Definitely, if you're in love, you will not take it well. But when the time passes, you will appreciate it.
So if I could summarize correctly, dating is not simply a means to find out if you're compatible, but dating should be rather a means to find out how faithful of a Christian the individual is.
Yeah, it's a value exchanging period. And so, like I said, back in the ancient world, we didn't really necessarily need to do that because you grew up in the same town. You kind of believed the same thing. You had the same customs. And, people didn't live separate lives in communities. And they kind of live the same way. There will be this time in the day, you do this and that kind of thing.
Right.
People go draw water here. They have the same conversations. There was one well in the town, that kind of thing. But now it's a little different, right? But we can't miss the essence or the core of what that kind of society established. So societally speaking, you definitely want to make sure you hold to that core principle of exchanging values. I think a lot of people, even older people my age, people older than me, they'll say things like, well, I like the character of this person.
Yeah.
And they'll take that as a priority. And again, maybe this is a hot take, but I don't think that's the ultimate thing. It is about values. Does this person hold to the same fundamental foundational values that I believe that I see in the Word of God?
Right. I think that's helpful for those who are dating right now. Again, not about compatibility, but about their faith. We did bring this up a little bit before, but because we're on the topic of dating, I am curious. There are times where people show, again, signs of cleaving. How much of that should be shown versus not? And the reason why I ask this is because I recently had a conversation with a good friend of mine, that said that he is leading pretty much family worship with his girlfriend. And he asked, is that okay? because I want to practice leading this girl to hopefully, get married and kind of like a precursor to the future. Is that the right word? Precursor?
Sure.
So is that okay? Like, can we do stuff like that? Can we hold hands when we pray? Can we do these things? Because I get it that these are things that you do as a married couple, but if we don't practice them now, how are we going to do it when we're married? Like, these types
You
of
hold
questions.
hands with your wife when you pray together?
Who, me and my wife?
Yeah. You still do that?
It depends on the day.
Depends on how you guys are feeling.
Yeah, like if I'm feeling combative a little bit, it's like you stay
Probably
on the other
not,
side of the bed.
Yeah, probably. I mean, they're probably young. They're probably cute.
Very cute.
Yeah, as an old man, I think these things are all cute because they're trying their best.
Yeah.
So I don't want to discourage them. But when you're married, those things will come up. And if you're trying these things out, I don't want to knock it. I just want to make sure that you do not forego the more important aspect. See, leading family worship before you're married is not the priority. It's not the thing that you should be seeking to do. It's working on your character and making sure you're developing yourself and being sanctified as a Christian while you're in your single state.
Mm-hmm.
Not acting like you're married when you're single, but in your single state, are you becoming more sanctified? Are you learning about the Lord? Are you giving yourself in service to Him? Are you developing your character? Are you readying yourself to be a husband or a wife? And is that what you're trying to do? And it can manifest itself in perhaps, leading a worship or something with your girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever it is, or having worship with your boyfriend. I just don't think that is something that is notable to me. It's cute, but it's not something where I would say, that's it. They're going to be great.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that necessarily because of that. And so it's cute, but don't forego the more important aspects of your single life. That's what I would say to that.
Thank you for that. There are surprisingly more questions on dating and marriage, but maybe this might be better if we separate this into 2 episodes. There are a lot more things that I didn't want to go into, especially dating in the church.
Maybe I should do more hot takes.
Hot takes are cool. Yeah, certain hot takes are cool. Actually, all hot takes are cool.
All right, here's another hot take.
Oh.
Anytime you decide to date somebody, run it by Pastor Eugene first, and he will give you a thumbs up or thumbs down. And if he gives you a thumbs down, then just walk away. We would have saved so much trouble if we did that. I'm only kidding. It's a joke. Do it by Sam.
No, thank you. I don't know anything. I don't want to know anything, to be honest with you. I really don't care. No, I do care. I just don't.
It's one of those things where people, they always date people on the down low first.
That's the thing. Yeah.
They text each other for weeks and then they ask, oh, is it okay if I date the person? But you've been texting, you've been essentially dating this person. And then now you're asking if it's okay. How am I going to say no when you already have the veil over your eyes? So, let's be real. Yeah. If you've been texting this person for weeks on end on the down low, don't be like, well, I'm thinking about dating this person. Be forthright. Be like, oh, I should have came sooner. If I really were to ask you your honest opinion, but things develop so quickly. I didn't, I don't know, whatever it is. Right. But then, if you really thought you were wise and you really want to counsel, just like the Bible says, you would do that before you start texting.
We got some schemers in here.
I mean, I think one of us here knows exactly what it's like to slide into people's DMs.
Well, Chunseok just walked in, so that's interesting.
Coincidence? I don't think anybody could imagine Chunseok sliding into people's DMs.
I can. Well, I don't want to imagine it, but I can imagine it.
What?
Yeah,
no, he's the most innocent.
See, that's this play.
It's a good play. It's working.
Yeah, I mean, that's another thing that I did want to talk about next week. So maybe a little teaser, How do you date in the church? Don't be low key like that. Don't be sus. Don't be scheming. Don't be schemo. So we'll talk about that. next week. Wow, I'm very, very excited about that conversation. Now we'll go into a quick Q&A.
We need a beat.
What you got in the bag? What you got in the bag?
What you got in the bag?
Q&A. As a man, how are we to understand the church being the bride of Christ?
As a man?
Because, okay, here's the thing. If you're a woman...
This is your question?
No, this is not my question.
Okay.
But if you're a woman, you know, being a bride, that's cool. That's great. But as a man, you're like, the church is the bride of Christ. I get it. It's the church, but it feels kind of like, it feels kind of weird. Like, how are we to take that?
I don't even know what you're asking.
So as a man, we know that obviously we're not the groom. We're the bride of Christ. So as a man, how do we like understand that? Because typically brides are female, but as a male, how are we to understand that we're the bride of Christ?
Oh, I see what you're
Yeah.
saying. How would you answer that?
I would answer it by talking about the fact that I think what we do is we take the opposite. So marriage and sex is to point to Christ, and it's to point to Christ and the church, that relationship. But we flipped it where we now take marriage to be the ultimate, and we sexualize everything. And so people are uncomfortable when they consider themselves, the church, being the bride of Christ, because they've over-sexualized everything. And they take what is supposed to point to the ultimate and they flip it.
Okay.
And so what I would answer is we have to understand that marriage is pointing to intimacy and the covenant commitment that we see in the Bible. And that's what Christ has done to us. He's committed himself to us, and we as his bride are his body. We are to love him and worship him and serve him. And it's speaking more of the intimate relationship that Christ has with his people rather than a man and a woman and the over-sexualization that we do today in our culture.
It's interesting you took it that way. Okay. You can see it from 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 3.
1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 3 reads, "But I want you to understand that the head of every man is Christ, the head of a wife is her husband, and the head of Christ is God."
Yeah, there's a certain order. There's a certain order that God has placed in the world, and this order reflects his character. And this is something that, you know, you probably are familiar with if you heard my sermons or even this podcast. And the order that we see is Christ is our head, just as we're the head of the wife. And so how do we understand ourselves to be the bride of Christ? Easy. Christ is our head. And if you are, let's say, called the bride of Christ, it's not all of a sudden, I think the question probably is something where, do I have to be effeminate now? Absolutely not. You still play the role that you've been given when it concerns, you know, leading your wife and, you know, protecting your wife and, you know, giving the commandments and being a priest over your wife and all that stuff, right? But at the same time, we understand who our authority is, the authority that we have over our heads, and that is Christ, the one that we submit to, the one that we respect, the one that we subject ourselves to. It is Christ. And so we should have that as our basic understanding when we see, when we consider ourselves to be the bride of Christ, right? So
Gotcha.
We are in subjection to him, and this time it will be, in our understanding, to be eternally. This is what we look forward to, and that subjection to him is good. It is pleasing to God, and it is good for us. And I think it's going to be a wonderful thing because, you know, we see that in any place you are in subject to something, one way or another. And so just because you're head over your wife doesn't mean no one's head over you, even in this life.
Yeah, yeah.
But what 1 Corinthians 11:3 is saying, ultimately, your head is Jesus Christ. And
Thank
so,
you.
yeah, we
Thank
should see
you
it
for
that
that.
way.
That's very, very helpful. That wasn't my question, but it's helpful.
Yeah, it's
to me as
interesting
well.
how you brought it back to sex or something. That
I think that's why dudes can sometimes be weirded out by that phrasing.
yeah.
And that's why I even brought that up.
Okay, that's good.
Thank you for that, Pastor Eugene. And we thank you for listening to this episode of the Dear Church podcast. Join us next week as we go even deeper into this discussion on dating in the church. How do you date in the church? How do you break up in the church? We thank you for listening to this episode of the Dear Church podcast. Join us next week as we continue this conversation on dating. We hope and pray that this has been a blessing in your ears. Fight the good fight, finish the race, keep the faith. Peace.